Good evening to all of you. I hope you all are not tired or sluggish and you all energized for this very interesting discussion we're going to have. Two very established and well-known speakers, one on sustainable development and one on global citizenship. To kickstart, I would request Dirk Messner to give us a starting thought, and then we will have Vanessa, and after that we'll open the house for questions. So can we have, Dirk, can we have your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah. So the discussion is about global citizenship, yes, and how global citizenship emerges and how important it is. And I do have three starting points for our discussion. The first one is that I think it is very important that we all understand, and this is part of educational challenges, of course, that we all understand that we are living in the age of global interdependencies. No? And if we are in the age of global interdependencies, obviously global cooperation and therefore global citizenship and therefore a perspective towards global commons, no, which are basic for the existence of all of us. I'm talking about 7.5 billion people currently. This is something which we need to reflect upon, because still most of our mental maps, the heuristics we work with, are national. No, I'm the director of the German Development Institute. So this is about development cooperation. So it is about global cooperation, global sustainable development. But even in an institute like mine, national lenses are still very strong. No? So we try to internationalize the institute itself. You have been working for Terry, no? We need to internationalize our institutions to have a chance to build up global perspectives and the cornerstones of global citizenship. So this was my first point. No? This is a challenge for all of us, a civilizational challenge, a cultural challenge. The second thing is then, I mean, we all celebrated in 2015 with very good reasons the Paris Agreement, and only weeks later the 2030 Agenda. This was a huge success for multilateralism. I was happy. No? I was in both negotiation processes engaged, and as a scientist I have been working a lot on these kind of issues. So 2015 was great, multilateralism, and then 2016, minimum two big shocks. No? The first big shock was Mr. Trump. I mean, a very big shock. No? I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, no, during the election campaign, and during the election night, no? And I was completely irritated because I haven't thought that this would have been possible. So our country first, no, in an age of global interdependencies, leads obviously to conflicts or inaction in fields where we need to cooperate. No, so this and Brexit was for us as European the next shock. No, so against European integration and European cooperation. So cooperation is not something which is already really stabilized. This is the second point. The third point is that, I mean, the idea of global citizenship already emerged in the very early days of enlightenment. No? Immanuel Kant. 1795, so 200 years ago, in his essay on the perpetual peace, no? He already thought about global citizenship. No? We did not even have national states in this period, stabilized ones, and he already had in mind global citizenship based on rule of law. No? Fantastic idea. So the question is, Brexit and Trump and all these kind of dynamics, is this only a dream? Is this naive? No? And my tentative answer would be that it is not naive, actually. If you would ask me to describe the global international system, I would say multilateralism is at crisis for several reasons, which we might discuss afterwards. We have many nationalist backlashes in many countries around the world, 20, 30, 40, no? And then we have a very strong trend, exponential growth, which is really good, no? That is about transnational movements and dynamics. So the networks between our countries, students and science and culture and cities and climate activists, etc., 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 no? Has never been as dense as they are nowadays. And this is, for me, this is a precondition for, I think global citizenship is emerging in these days. We are in a transition period towards global citizenship and better global cooperation. And maybe these nationalist backlashes are an indicator that things are become serious. No? So several people would not like to see this kind of global cooperation and transnational dynamics move forward, and therefore we do have these nationalist backlashes. No? So I think global citizenship is a huge challenge, but it's not a dream. It could become reality, and the basic cornerstones might emerge during these days.
Question which comes to my mind, and maybe after that we'll move to Vanessa. So there is a clear disconnect between what's happening in the soft politics area, where the people building connections, networks, there is a lot of interest and encouragement by the government also that yes, we should be part of the networks and cooperate with people internationally. But I also feel that the developed countries are in a position to say that. So my question is, do you think the entire concept of global citizenship and the global citizenship education has been hijacked by the Western ideals? And what's your take on that? If not,
you said these transnational and global perspectives are emerging in soft policy fields. Did you say that?
I mean, I'm saying that, but what my question is that there is a disconnect between what the government want, like big developed countries, at the same time what their civil society groups are wanting to do. So where is the disconnect? And the second question was, do you think this entire discourse of global citizenship is hijacked? Is it too westernized? And if it's yes, then how do we localize it?
So 2 points. The first point would be, therefore I ask back. No? I think that this kind of global citizenship and transnational movements are not only emerging in soft policy fields, let's say culture. No? So artists working together. No? You could say this is soft. I mean, the climate field, which is being negotiated next door, this is hard politics. No? Climate politics is about decarbonizing the global economy. This is the future of the global economy. This is the future of infrastructures, of cities, of investment rates. So this is hard politics. And it is a highly transnationalized movement and network which has been emerging over the last 20 years. I think this is a huge success. No? So is this a Western movement? My feeling is that it's not a Western movement. In our institute, we do have a program which we call the Managing Global Governance Academy. So we invite people from different regions and different countries and different country groups. And the people attending the conference are between 25 and 35 or so. So next generation. No? And for me, it's always wonderful to work with this group, because what I'm seeing is that global perspectives are emerging. This is not Western. No? When we start, in our Europeans are participating. No? In the first 2 weeks, we ask climate change or global economics or whatever, what is the perspective of your nation? No? And they start elaborating on that. The second question is then, okay, now the Chinese lady should move into the footsteps of the South African colleagues. No? So let's have a perspective, let's change perspectives. No? This is the second step. And the third step is, now let's imagine we would be global citizens, no? In a world of global cooperation. What would be a global approach based on which kind of normative patterns, no? Fairness, for example, human rights, democracy, etc. And I think this has nothing to do with westernized perspective. This is something which is emerging around the globe.
Thank you very much. Vanessa, can we have your thoughts on the topic?
Okay, so I think I will start by saying that the ontology of what you're saying is still Western, but there is a methodological globalization of ways of thinking, especially for people who are mobile, who can transverse these borders, that makes us feel like it is a very inclusive process. But I would like to challenge that. So my work takes that approach of challenging a little bit this national frameworks, or frameworks based on the nation state. And I have 3 general points, which are supposed to be very provocative, actually, and then 4 implications for education. So point number 1 is that the ways of knowing and being that have created the problems that we face today will probably not be solved by the ways of knowing and being that have created the problems that we face today. And therefore, Newton, Kant, Marx, and Adam Smith are probably not going to give us the answers that we seek. So that's point 1. Point 2. We can't jump into the new without digesting the lessons of our historical present, or composting its organic matter in metaphorical terms as well. So, therefore, we can't turn our backs to Newton, Kant, Marx, and Smith either, right? But we have to change our relationship with them, what we're learning from them. And point 3 is a point where that comes from an experience that I had 2 weeks ago when I was in the Amazon forest with 2 indigenous groups that I do field work with. And I asked them what they would like me to say in this conference. And I explained that the conference is interested in the kind of knowledge that compels people to act in terms of climate change. And their answer was very interesting. So first thing they said, Western thinking makes those distinctions between mind and body, reason and emotions, right? So the idea is that if you change the reasonable mind tells the body and emotion what to do, and they follow. And they said that their perspective is actually the other way around. They said that we change the gut changes the heart, and then once the heart is changed, the head follows. So that was the first point they said. And then what they did was that they painted my arms so that my arms could remind me of what I had to say today, which was really interesting. Their other point is that we have been numbed, those of us who are socialized in these divisions of mind and body have been numbed to our sensorial sense of connection with everything, with each other, and with everything, with the planet. And we need to reactivate that sensibility. And that what we need is a sensibility. And a sensibility is not a competency, it's not a skill, it's not a piece of information. So I promised them that I would say that here. So I would bring the message here. So these are the 3 points. And the implications for education that I draw from this are 4. So the first one is that sensing that we are part of a bigger metabolism is the first thing that global citizenship should do. And taking the lesson from this idea that this is not skill or competency or information, we need to find a way of working with our sensorial perceptions and activating this visceral sense of connection with each other in order to be able to move forward. In my work, I use this idea that we need to think in layered ways about our existence. So there's me, one layer, me, in this body. Then there's me and you. And then there's me in you, right? In a wider metabolism beyond even this lifetime. And then there is neither me nor you. There's an I and an us beyond form and time, which is what some people would call the spiritual perspective, the spiritual connections that interweave our existence. Point B, global citizenship education needs to bust our illusions. And the first illusion that needs to be busted is that the paradigm of continuous and unending growth and consumption as a driver for health and prosperity actually, and which has already exceeded the limits of the planet, is the first thing that needs to go. And yet, our schooling is still based in individualistic, consumerist, metropolitan thinking. So busting this illusion means that we need to see the promises of this paradigm as unrealistic. And this involves both a disenchantment with these promises, which we're already feeling, people already feel. The problem is that disenchantment leads to resentment, leads to loss, and leads to hate sometimes. But there's also the idea of seeing disillusionment, the loss of illusion, as a positive thing. That's in the loss of an illusion, that's when we get real, right? And that's where we can actually face the problems without turning our backs to the complexities of it or the paradoxes of it. So point 3. We need to enable people in global citizenship education to disinvest in harmful desires and reinvest in collective well-being. And that's very, very difficult because our harmful desires in this bigger paradigm are things that are also delicious and that also provide us comfort, that provide us happiness. And this is very difficult to invite people to do, to sit with that difficulty. And the last point is that global citizenship education should enable us to grow up and grow out of this fragility that compels us or leads us to hold on to simplistic solutions and to self-interest, actually, in order to do 2 things. 1, we need to learn to sit with the discomfort of facing the complexities, paradoxes, uncertainties, and complicities of doing this work. So we need to metabolize or digest the mistakes that have been made in the past in order to make only different mistakes in the future. And the second thing is that we need to learn to move and breathe together differently in this walk. into different ways of being. In a way, we need to compost that organic matter into a fertilizer that allows us to live together and to find existence and ways of coexistence that go beyond even nation states or capitalism and socialism, that goes beyond a singular rationality that is imposed as a totalizing force, and that helps us to relate to each other beyond the need even for identity, that helps us see our connections beyond what our self-image is or what knowledge can encompass. So I think that's the global citizenship I would defend here today.
Thank you so much. I'll have a question for Vanessa, and after that I would request Dirk to respond to her contentious issues that she's raising. Vanessa, do you think global citizenship, the dialogue, the discourse is assuming some homogeneity of the worldviews within a culture? Because you spoke about indigenous community where you're coming from, getting your, your arms painted. So what are your thoughts? I think there is some sort of homogeneity emerging there.
I think that the traditional ideas of global citizenship education that are based on the national frameworks, they assume that Brazilians would have a national perspective, Indians would have a national perspective, but every nation is extremely heterogeneous. There are lots of tensions and struggles within the nation, and this is a dynamic process. It's changing all the time, so it's very different. This idea of representation is an idea that is fraught with difficulties. And although I think it's important for us to have in one layer that understanding, it's also important to have other layers where we are questioning even the idea of representability, right? In terms, both in national or ethnic terms.
Yeah. And what are the contentious issues that keep emerging, especially when we see post-decade of ESD phase and then new forms of adjectival education emerging, like prevention of violent extremism education? There is some contention in the education policy in this community. What are those? And
I think there is something interesting about having to work with mainstream frameworks that are recognized by governments and are pushed in policies, and at the same time paying attention to dissenting voices and initiatives that are extremely creative that challenge these frameworks. The ESD is an important one, right? The Sustainable Development Goals, actually, especially the goal of growth. Right? So I'm working with groups that still engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, but they are very critical of the idea of continuous growth. So that's I think one of the tensions is to work with what's intelligible and what's not intelligible for the mainstream public. And the other issue is that there is this tendency to hold on to simplistic solutions because they are easy or they make us feel good. And until we, that's why I call it a fragility, until we outgrow this fragility and actually face what's real and what's difficult and what's uncomfortable, we're going to continue to drive this search for transformation or for solution as something that will just, it's the hope of continuity of the same, right? And in this hope for continuity of the same, we can say that, for example, young people will save us, or even indigenous people will save us, or any group. And then I think this is a deflection of our responsibility to actually go deeper into the analysis and face the difficult issues.
So my question to Dirk is on the deflection of the responsibility that has been, that she has just said, and how would you respond to Vanessa's argument here?
I agree with Vanessa when you are arguing that the challenges we are confronted with are new and different. No? I'm in my work on sustainability issues. I'm very often talk about civilizational challenges. No? So we do have technical things which we might use to solve challenges, decarbonization or incentive schemes and all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, I think it is a civilizational challenge. So I'm with you at this point. No? And I see minimum 4 of these civilizational challenges. The first one is, and again I would agree with you, you talked about me and you, and then me in you and you in me. No? We just had a conference in our Center for Global Cooperation Research last week, and we had a workshop on that, we called it threeness. Threeness. So it's me, it's you, and then it is me and you and me. So a reservoir of concepts which we find globally, no, thinking into this direction. Because normally we argue that cooperation within the group is relatively easy. It's even triggered by the in-group, out-group mechanism. So the enemies outside help us to cooperate within the group. But at the end of the day, we also need to bridge this within the group and outside the group, threeness. No? So we did a workshop looking around the globe, different cultures, to look for these different kinds of concepts. And there are many around. No? So there is a reservoir of thinking around this. No? This would be my first point. And so this would it is an intercultural challenge and endeavor. Second point, sustainability. This is about, for me, the major term here is the Anthropocene. No? So humans driving the planet. This is for humans, this is completely new. And this is a completely different perspective, comparing it with the beginnings of the Enlightenment process. No? The idea of the Enlightenment process was that we need we need to manage. And we need to drive nature. We need to dominate nature. Because the background of this was that nature has been dominating people for a long period of time. No? So now humans started to dominate the planet until the point that we are now driving the whole planet. We are changing the climate system, we are changing the oceans, and in this process we are putting under stress human civilization. So we need to take care of the planet and the stabilization of the planet, and culturally this is new. This is a common good which we need to learn to manage well, no, for all of us. This is a cultural issue. And this has to do with education. No? The third element which I wanted to mention very briefly here is that it's about time horizons. No? I mean, look into our political systems. The longest periods which we are thinking of in terms of looking forward is 1 or 2 generations, pension schemes. No? So we care for our parents and we care for our children. So we have in front of us 2 generations. But if you remember again the Anthropocene thing, no? If we do things wrongly now in terms of global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, no? If we go wrong for the next 30 years, we are changing the basic conditions for humans forever. No? So the impacts of what we do now do have impacts for all the generations to come and the planet. So this kind of time dimension is new to us. This is a cultural learning exercise which we need to have in mind. And then the last point is, if we follow you, no? So you talked about intercultural learning processes, no? If I understood you right. And I would argue that global citizenship needs to be based on interaction between people from different cultural backgrounds and experiences, backgrounds. So diversity is very important. No? And I would relate this to an evolutionary biologist, Robin Dunbar. Robin Dunbar has been working on how we manage as humans social complexity. No? And what he found out is being summarized in what he calls his Dunbar numbers. No? And this has to do with education. What he shows is that all of us, we do have 2 to 3 or 4 real friends. Only 2 to 3. No? Then we have 7 to 10 friends, so we know their personal environments, etc., etc. We might have towards 100 people which we are engaged in, professionally, for example. So if you would have in our agendas or in our Facebook communication more than 100 people, we cannot manage this. People are not capable to do this. No? And then we remember 1,000 faces and names. This is what we can manage in terms of social complexity. And the point here is that we learn our heuristics and the mental maps we work with in this group of 100. These are personal relationships. And if this group of 100 would be all Germans in my case, or Indians in your case, or Canadians in your case, how could we learn and how could we imagine different worlds, perspective, and cultural norms and values? No? So if we don't internationalize in our education systems the group of the 100, no, we will not get nowhere.
Before I open the house to the audience, One question, because Dirk has several times in this last 2 minutes, 3 minutes, has really focused upon the role of education. My question to Vanessa, and maybe we could have very brief input from Dirk, because I already see some hands raising in the audience, amongst the audience. There seems to be a lot of expectation from education to be changing the world, from countering violent extremism to generating employment to everything. So, should we or even think, or can we take off some burden from education? What are your thoughts on this?
I think that education has become a scapegoat of all these problems. I think you're right there. And there are the questions about whether education should adapt to change or should shape change too. So there are two sides of this coin. But I think going back to a discussion we had in the morning about the dog, I don't like the metaphor too much, but I think it's interesting to think about the ways we've been thinking about education is about feeding, or who feeds, or whether students get fed. But I'm thinking more about how people metabolize things. So education is about the digestion of things. Students are already being fed, like the dog is licking toxic waste in a way. But how are we metabolizing what we are ingesting from society and all this crisis, and what is coming out of that metabolism, right? And how does that then go back into a system, a bigger metabolism that produces our food? So these are the questions that I would say education should be concerned with. But the creation of jobs and the cohesion of society are expectations that the state is imposing more and more on education, and I would say that that is a result of a neoliberal drive.
Okay. Can we have some, any questions from the audience? Yes, Saransh? Maybe you're loud enough, you can ask it. Take.
That was an instruction, thank you. A wonderfully educational instruction. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful interaction, and great to learn that. But I mean, it has been acknowledged within the conversation, but to just spell it out, humans and human societies are very short-term oriented. We are bothered about tomorrow, about a month, and the politicians are bothered about the next election, whenever it happens to be, and what can be given. And the reason why they cannot ignore that is because if they don't take that into concern, whatever people are generally concerned about, say jobs or just good roads or all of that, then they would be out of business and somebody else will take their position. So how do you articulate that? Like what you said, Vanessa, was amazing, was really beautiful, and I've been interacting and thinking a lot more about that, about the perspective. But the thing is that how do you articulate that into political consciousness? And how do you make that transition even for people? Like, say, Dirk, you said that 30 years what we do is going to define like hundreds of 200 years or maybe thousands after that. But the thing is, these 30 years, then actually I'm saying this with all sincerity, that then we need to just hang our boots right now. We have enough wealth in the world to recycle and provide for people at least for 30 years, and actually take time off and like, children, let's just not go to school and let's just think what we need to do about jobs 10 years from now. But actually that's possible if we actually willed ourselves to do that. But how can we do that as a society, or develop mechanisms to do that?
That's a question for both of them?
For both of them, yeah.
Okay, so there's some serendipity here, because I left during the break and I ended up in an event about the Amazon just in the other hall in the museum, and I met a relative there, an indigenous person who is related to somebody that is my relative. And the person actually, the first thing that he said, he was from the Krenak ethnicity, and he said he would come, but I can't see him here. He said, I asked him too, what would you like me to say? And he said, can you please mention that the ability to think to take into account the concerns of 7 generations from now is an innate thing. Humans do that because indigenous people do that. It's innate. We have severed that somehow. We have turned it off somehow. So it's not that we don't have the capacity. The capacity is there. We need to understand why we're not doing it. And if it is like a biological problem for those who live in the cities, we don't know. But he said it's innate. And unless we turn that on again at a DNA level, we're going to continue competing with each other to the point where there's no more resources, right, for us to survive on. So he was here to try to bring that message. But we did talk about the fact that in Brazil we have this proverb that says that it's only when the water reaches your bum in a flood situation that you do something, or that you can swim. Before that, if the water is at your ankle or at your knee, you can't swim, you can only walk. So until the water reaches your bum, we can only walk. So maybe, and I think that's the point where it gets into policy and people start to listen, the fact is that the waters are rising. And until it reaches the bum, I think we're just going to continue to come, people are going to continue to nod, but to reach policy level, we need the system to be ready for a change, and I don't think we're ready yet.
Yeah, so I'm actually optimistic that humans, are able to learn and to imagine completely new worlds. I mean, imagine a Neolithic woman 15,000 years ago, small village of a few people starting to domesticate animals and inventing agriculture. If you would ask her, how could you imagine a city like Uruk, the first largest city in humanity, 60,000 people living together, 6,000 years later, 6,000 years before our time. Probably she could not have imagined how a city with 50,000 people might look like, living in this. And then again, a person living in Uruk, how could he or her imagine a globalized world, with people from around the world sitting together in one room, a climate conference next door, with delegates from 200 nation states. So we have been imagining, and we have been developing, and we have been learning incredible things. So we are culturally, we are driven by cultural evolution. Therefore, I'm optimistic. What makes me nervous when it comes to the Anthropocene thing and the climate thing and the tipping points in the Earth system challenges is the brief period of time in which we can solve challenges. This makes me nervous. So in principle, I think we would have fantastic opportunities to move culturally into many directions. And we are learning global perspectives. We are learning intercultural interactions and all these kind of things. And this brings me to the last point, which you mentioned at the very end of your last statement. So what is also human, and there we need to make progress, it's human, and historically we do have a lot of evidence that we change and we transform and we adapt in situations of crisis and conflict. So, the United Nations is the result of 2 world wars. And the European cooperation process is the result of 2 terrible wars beforehand in Europe. And then, based on these crises, we developed further. And the challenge now is that we need to change and transform our economies and our behaviors, etc., being confronted with the knowledge about the disastrous consequences of Earth system change, large scale, before it happens. So preventive action is needed. And this, again, this is new to us as a civilization.
Next question from the audience. We just had, yes?
Hi. Fabian Bendish again from Lund University. I really appreciate this panel. I found it very interesting because it relates to lots of things that I feel and think. I think last Thursday there was a whole day event on renewable energies for reaching 100% renewable energies. On Sunday there was the IRENA Renewable Energy Day that also says that 100% renewable energy is very, very much possible. So that would be one solution to climate change. I was wondering how afraid you are of technological change that might prevent a societal, more in-depth change. So we could, change the energy system and employ lots of renewable energy, and we might not face as much climate change as we would otherwise, but that will take away from going away from consumerism, going away from capitalism. And that's very much a question of reform versus transform. And I feel like you're advocating the latter, but what we're doing right now is going towards the former. And I just heard in a session previously that changing the educational system takes 20 years. By then, renewable energies apparently will be very widespread. Is my question clear?
Would you like to respond to that,
Like,
Dirk?
how afraid are you of technological change that might prevent more in-depth societal change?
I'm not afraid of technological change. I'm fighting for technological change. No? I mean, the renewable energies are very good. No? We need to go for new types of mobility. So e-mobility is very good. We need have in mind that we are using other resources. So we have to think about circular economies. So it is about technology, the right norms and standards. It is a huge transformation. But at the end of the day, it's also about human behavior. This is what we are talking about here now. No? So I'm not against technology. I'm not against incentive schemes and economic incentive schemes. I'm very, very much in favor of it if we solve problems going along the way. But human behavior is relevant, as we are arguing here. No? If we think that global commons, and stabilizing global commons is relevant, first we need to accept that global commons as such are existing. No, and that we should struggle for those. I mean, there are many people around which don't accept this. And if we are arguing that what we do during the next 30 years to have impacts for the next 10,000 years, again, people need to accept that this is a new reality which we have to build into our political systems, into our institutions, because it's still not accepted. No? I mean, in the German context, meanwhile we are speaking in Berlin, in our capital, a new government might emerge. No? So they are discussing climate change. No? And they do have huge debates on that. And I know all of them, and all of them are arguing that we are in favor of Paris. No? And the second sentence is then, we are in favor of not passing through the 2 degrees Celsius guardrail. No? They are arguing this. And half of them then say, but we cannot phase out of coal in Germany. No? I mean, by physical laws, no, this is impossible. No? But this is about cognitive systems, it's about human behavior, it's about mental maps which need to change. No? So it goes beyond only technological dynamics.
Can I?
Yes.
Yep, just very quickly. Yeah. I'm part of a network that works with a framework called Earth Care, which is it's Earth Care framework for global justice. And Earth is, of course, ecological, but care means cognitive, affective, relational, and economic justice. And I have a handout, actually, that I've asked Nicola to kindly distribute at the end, with also the written statement of what I was going to say before, and then I changed it. But what you're talking about is ecological justice, and it's very important, right, to use appropriate technology to sort the challenges that we face today. But if we only address ecological justice without addressing cognitive, affective, relational, and economic justice, we're still going to be repeating the mistakes we have made through the new technologies that we invent. And so it's important to think about the framework and the horizons of hope in much broader ways.
Last question, we can... Ross, okay, last question. You can take this mic.
I like that metaphor about the education as a metabolism process. And what should we eat in to be more healthy in this global citizen context?
The metabolism. What should we eat? Broccoli? Maybe with some olive oil on top. I think probiotics and prebiotics is something that I'm working on because it is the gut bacteria that we have to be thinking about now. The kids are eating, and we are eating anything from the internet. We're eating junk food, basically, right? And with the cacophony of information, because part of the Enlightenment Project was to have actually coherence, consensus, certainty, and control, which is made impossible in the information age. People have wealth, and not a wealth of information in front of them. So it's very difficult to establish coherence of information. So if they're eating this incoherence, the prebiotic and the probiotic that we eat should enable young people and ourselves to make different sense of this information and sort out what is good bacteria, what's bad bacteria for your gut. And we should be paying attention to what comes out of this metabolism as a measure of where we want to go. Because if we take the metaphor further, if we think about soil regeneration even, and where our food will come from and how we'll feed so many people in the planet, we need to be thinking about the validity of knowledge in terms of what kinds of possibilities for life it can sustain in the future.